Right here on AM 1300 WMEL, the Talk to Me station. Glenn, we're talking about memorial benefits, in particular right now, the burial. Should we throw out the VA's all catch-all number?
Yeah, we'll do that a couple of times, but let's give it to them right now, Gary.
All right, it's if you have questions about making arrangements after you've lost a loved one who is a veteran, you can reach the VA direct, get a pen, 800-697-6947. That's 800-697-6947, or the website, www.cem, I'm guessing for cemetery,
Right.
.va.gov. So that's cem.va.gov. All right, now you mentioned the honors program. There's so many more benefits.
Yeah, and in addition to the funeral honors program, which, as a quick reminder, only the funeral director can set that up. So, unfortunately, they will not give us the magic number to the DOD and the County Veteran Service Office to do that with. Nor will you be able to get that if you call the VA, because this is a Department of Defense funeral honors program, not a VA funeral honors program.
Good point.
Now, one of the things I talked about that are included in everything is usually called burial benefits, but there's a difference between burial and plot and those kind of things in the VA's lingo. But we'll start with burial allowance, and that's a potentially a partial reimbursement, and key on the word partial, considering the cost of burials nowadays. That's a partial reimbursement potentially for the person who pays the burial of the veteran in full. The key word is in full.
So you got a receipt in hand.
That's right. And to be eligible, the veteran had to have been died from a service-connected disability. It was a service-connected death, and that affects the payment. The veteran had to be receiving money from the VA for compensation or pension, or entitled to it, but not getting it because of retirement. Believe it or not, there's a few people in this county who are military retirees who at the time, they're old fellers, and at the time they retired, the VA didn't want to mess with them, so they told them, well, don't change it, because all it is just a dollar-for-dollar trade-off from your retired pay to the VA pay, which was true back then, but it was still bad advice.
Exactly, because part of that was tax-free.
Yeah, part of it was tax-free, and it took them out of the VA system for later on, where they might have gotten notices about increases and changes in criteria and so forth and so on. Another eligibility category is the veteran dies while hospitalized by the VA or receiving care under a VA contract. And VA contract happens most often when the veteran's rated 100% permanently, totally service-connected disabled, and the VA contracts with a local nursing home and pays the contract rate to the nursing home. And that happens a lot in Florida because the VA nursing homes are all full and stay full.
Or another condition is if you were traveling under authorization at VA expense, correct?
Correct.
For whether it was an examination through the C&P service or treatment, maybe some other form of care.
Yep, and speaking of the state nursing homes, if the veteran died after October 9, 1996, just call it 96, while a patient in a VA-approved state nursing home, of which there are 6 in Florida, so that can happen, unfortunately, if it's one of your loved ones. But again, it's paid to the person who pays the bill in full and submits proof from the funeral home that they paid the bill, that it was their name says, the funeral home says they paid it, and it's paid in full. Both of those have to be there. And who pays it in full does not have to be a relative at all. It can be anybody. It's who pays the funeral bill in full.
The reimbursement's going to go to that person.
That's right. And some funeral homes will file the claims and claim this themselves, subtracting the amount they're going to get from the VA from the amount of money they're charging you for the funeral services, if you will.
Kind of a rebate.
Bill. Yeah, kind of a rebate to them, just as a favor to you during a bad time of need in your life.
Of course.
Now, how much they pay has changed over the years, and currently, if it's a service-connected death, the reimbursement will be up to $2,000. And
so, Glenn, if a veteran has a service-connected heart condition and they pass away from that condition, or something related to the heart.
Right.
That's what we're talking about?
Exactly. And in that particular case, it's up to $2,000 because you can get cremations and a basic urn and all that for around $800 at some of these places nowadays. So if you paid only $800, you don't get the $2,000, you get the $800.
Right, so your burial and funeral expense allowance, or plotter and interment allowance, is what we're talking about from the top, right?
That's right. Service-related deaths, a whole different category. It's $2,000. Now, if it's a non-service connected cause of the death, and the veteran again was in receipt of money from the VA at the time of death, because we're not talking a service-connected death in this instance.
So maybe they were receiving non-service connected pension?
Right.
Okay.
Or they might have been receiving some compensation for service-connected disability, but they didn't die from that, anything related to that service-connected disability.
Maybe they had a knee problem, but they
Yeah.
passed away from a heart attack.
Yeah, things
Okay.
like that.
All right.
Exactly.
And how much is that?
Well, that's an interesting way to figure that nowadays. One is the burial allowance is $300.
That's across the board.
That's across the board. If the veteran's buried in a national cemetery, or if the veteran's buried in a private cemetery, $300 to the person we talked about who's eligible for that reimbursement.
The one that paid the bill.
The one that paid the bill in full. Okay. Now, if the veteran died in if the veteran is buried in a private cemetery after October 1 of the death was after October 1, 2011, and they are buried in a private cemetery, then there's a $700 plot allowance now. That used to be less than that. We'll just leave it at that.
Okay, but now it's $700 towards the plot.
Towards the plot, in this same example, buried in a private cemetery, $300 burial allowance, so you got $1,000 in that instance, which is, a significant increase than it used to be. Now, if the veteran died in a VA medical facility or en route or from a VA medical facility, then they also are entitled, instead of the $300 burial allowance, a $700 burial allowance. So now we got a total of $1,400 for a non-service connected, for all the burial and plot allowances together.
All right, so you can see there's significant benefit here, folks. You've got to inquire about this. I gave you the number, 800-697-6947, because really talking to the VA Cemetery Affairs is the best way to, if you have any question.
Oh, absolutely. And, we've got the cemetery over in Bushnell, which is between Tampa and Ocala. We've got a national cemetery, South Florida, which is down close to Fort Lauderdale. There's a new North Florida VA cemetery, national cemetery, which is up in the Jacksonville area. There's one up in the Pensacola area, but people don't tend to use those. Those are a long ways off to go visit the grave of a deceased loved one. So usually the ones that are in use around here are Bushnell over close to the West Coast, the South Florida Cemetery down close to Fort Lauderdale, and the North Florida Cemetery in the Jacksonville area. And let me throw in here, because if a person dies on active duty, the military takes care of burying them and all
Correct.
that. The VA doesn't do that. They don't bury anybody. They just have this reimbursement program available for you.
Important point. And when you do this, when you begin this process, as you know, there's always paperwork. There's an application for burial benefits. Funeral home should have that. It's a 521-530. And you're going to need a copy of the Veterans DD-214, their discharge document.
And you're going to need the death certificate, which normally takes about 10 working days to get that issued. And when we encourage you, come into our office. It seems real simple, but you can get real confused real easy on these VA forms. And come into our office, and we ask that you bring the long form death certificate. That lists the reasons of death. They also will issue you a short form, which does not list the causes of death. We can't help you determine if it might be a service-connected cause of death without having that long form of the death certificate, so we can see what all causes of death that they put down when they fill that form out for you.
And that's important, because in addition, you may have some survivorship benefits, dependents indemnity compensation,
Absolutely.
Those are important points to make. So that cause of death is oh so important.
Okay, and that pretty much covers that part of it. Let's shift gears here and talk about headstones, markers, and medallions. And this again is the old if and or but world of VA benefits. This is a fairly complex one, but remember what I'm talking about here. Headstones, markers, and medallions. So who's eligible for this is basically any veteran who didn't have a dishonorable discharge. If you have less than an honorable but not a dishonorable, the VA will determine on a case-by-case basis if you're eligible for the benefit, as they would for any VA benefit. And there is no allowance paid to people in lieu of the VA furnishing the marker. That used to happen up until 1990, so people sometimes get confusing street help on that.
The rumor mill.
It's a rumor.
Right.
And the markers are in granite, marble, or bronze, and they also have markers that are flat ground markers, and they have markers for niches if the person is cremated and ashes are put in a columbaria. So
and this is a benefit that they can take care of down the road. This doesn't have to be at the time.
Oh, absolutely. All of these burial benefits can be applied for within 2 years after the death of the veteran. And there's also a new program that if you have a private marker in a private cemetery somewhere, you can get a medallion that comes with an installation kit that's by branch of services different for each medallion, and put that onto the headstone.
Okay, so
it doesn't fit the marker. It only fits a headstone. Let me throw that in there.
That's an important point to make. I'm going to throw the number out there again. It's 800-697-6947 if you're dealing with this issue. And it's a good idea to plan ahead anyway.
Oh, absolutely.
The only thing for sure is death and taxes. So
yeah, thanks for using that word plan ahead, which reminds me, you cannot plan ahead in terms of making a reservation in a VA National Cemetery. You can only obtain the service there and the free plot there at the time of need translation when the veteran passes away.
Very good. So we want you folks to be informed. That's why you're listening to American Warrior Radio, and especially during times like this when you're dealing with the loss of a loved one. You know, you want to have as much information as possible available to you. Glenn, what's the number at your office again?
Number in my office is, for those out of county, 321-633-2012.
Stick with us on American Warrior Radio. We'll be right back.